Welcome. My name is Jayne Josem. I'm the CEO of the Melbourne Holocaust Museum. I'd like to acknowledge that this gathering is taking place on the lands of the Bunurong people. I pay my deep respects to their elders, past, present and emerging. I acknowledge their terrible history of injustice and brutality and their ongoing struggle for fair treatment. And I thank the proud Yorta Yorta man, William Cooper, for standing up on behalf of our people in 1938, following the events of Kristallnacht. Welcome this Yom HaShoah to a special evening, and a warm welcome to those visiting our new digs for the first time. And especially welcome to the Holocaust survivors among us. Thank you. This theme of inherited memories is dear to my heart. Descendants of survivors have been gifted a difficult inheritance, the memories and stories of the survivors. One academic, Roger I. Simon, called it a terrible gift. Each of us has a responsibility to care for these stories and share them, so I call on you all to be active in your duty to remember the past. Please do not remain passive. Each of us has preferred modes of sharing memories, whether through stories, poetry, art, song, performance. I promise I won't sing though. I was the curator here for 18 years, and as a curator, I have the opportunity to tell stories through exhibitions. Our new exhibition, opening in a matter of months, has an incredible array of local survivor stories being delivered through a wide range of media, through artefacts, testimony, poetry, artworks, film. Another example of the storytelling that we support here can be seen on the walls of this room. Created in 2015, the Memory Reconstruction Project. We invited survivors and their descendants, who were volunteers here, to come together and sit around tables as family groups across multiple generations. Armed with a scanner, scissors and glue sticks, we invited them to create collages. We later digitised these collages and now have printed them on metal, each one representing one survivor story. Simple but powerful. Tonight, we're joined by a wonderful and diverse range of memory enthusiasts as they reveal how and perhaps why they transmit inherited memories. I just want to kick off with a little story to demonstrate how survivor memories can be absorbed in one's early years and how they can then be shared, even by the very young. My youngest, Lucy, who's now 23, had to answer a question in grade 2. Who is your superhero and why? She wrote, my granny Sabina, because she jumped over the ghetto wall. A cute picture of her flying granny accompanied this. Lucy's grandmother, the late Sabina Josem, was a volunteer librarian here for many years. Diminutive in stature, it would have been a miracle if she could jump a picket fence, let alone a wall. But what she did do was climb over the Warsaw Ghetto wall with the help of a ladder and a Christian who was waiting over the other side to whisk her away to safety. Sabina's survival was a miracle, and I can attest that she definitely earned her superhero status. So I invite you to sit back and we'll hear some other examples and we'll see whether any of these can top off Lucy's. But first, we're going to hear, actually, no, not first. I'm going to introduce Siân Darling to you. Siân Darling is the multi-talented and multifaceted human being who is the curator and founder of the Museum of Inherited Memories, who are partnering us in tonight's event. So I invite Siân to the stage. Thank you.
Good evening. It's so lovely to see so many warm faces, and especially those of our survivors. My deepest respect and gratitude and love to all of you. That was a beautiful welcome, acknowledgement of country, Jayne. Thank you. The Jewish community arrived here as refugees or immigrants. Some, like my family, arrived in a decimated and devastated state after surviving the Holocaust, and it was on Bunurong country, that they were given the safety to begin their long road of intergenerational healing. And I acknowledge that Australia's non-Indigenous community has a long way to go in supporting the vital healing of our First Nations friends. For the past few years, I've been curating events for Yom HaShoah to engage a younger generation in this legacy. I'm delighted to collaborate this year with the Melbourne Holocaust Museum, an institution that's paved the way. My thanks to Aviva and Alice, and Jen particularly, and Jayne, who have been instrumental in getting us here this evening. I founded the Museum of Inherited Memories out of passion and motivation to utilise storytelling as a way of inspiring empathy, to remember our past, to protect our future. We inherit memories from our ancestors, from our homes, from our society. It can be memory from family, from culture, and from humanity. Tonight we're lucky to be hearing from several storytellers in the form of musicians, poetry, authors, speakers, and educators. Ruben will just set up the sound now as I introduce to you the guests on the panel. And I do ask that you hold your applause until the end. Sarah Grynberg is an expert in elevating human behaviour to a state of higher consciousness. Through her research, education, and speaking roles, she's created somewhat of a blueprint to achieving greatness, hence the title of her internationally successful podcast, A Life of Greatness. Tracey Collie is a seasoned secondary educator. She first visited the Melbourne Holocaust Centre as a student and is now the Education Programs Officer. That's really cool, and I want to hear more about that. Bram Presser is a semi-reformed punk rocker, a recovering academic, and a lapsed lawyer. He's also an award-winning novelist. He wrote The Book of Dirt, which is a heartwarming story about a grandson's devotion to the power of storytelling and his family's legacy. Ezra Faigenbaum is a Year 8 student, has always loved reading because it transports him to other worlds. This love for reading has inspired Ezra to pursue writing as a passion. Emily Lubitz is gorgeous. Just distracted me. And she's just finished a national tour of her new EP, which is brilliant, called Begin Again. Previously, she was the lead singer and songwriter in the acclaimed indie folk band Tin Pan Orange, and is the ethereal voice behind the sensation of a song, Dumb Ways to Die. Lior is one of Australia's most treasured singer-songwriters, renowned for his beautiful voice and songs that radiate truth and sincerity. Now, please give a round of applause to our speakers as Lior makes his way to the stage to share his song, My Grandfather.
When I was born, my grandfather held me in his warm hands, and it seems though his eyes are teary, but it's hard to tell from the old photograph. While my brother and sister danced at the feet of his tired and weathered frame, he said, "There's a light to this boy I've really seen," and there he gave me my name. Well, my grandfather was a sniper in the Red Army. He never knew any brothers in arms, for on both sides stood enemy. With a cold, unbroken will to survive, his steady hand took aim, and he drank just enough to keep himself warm, for he never spoke his true name. Stand on the water's edge and watch me go crazy as the gentle waves rolled in. Looking back, I wonder how he must have felt watching me running so free. All the years in his life he wished he could forget. Did he look at the world through me? When I was a man, I flew across the ocean. When I heard he didn't care, I listened as he spoke of his turbulent life from his ordinary chair. And he ended by saying, oh, I've had enough. The time's come for me to go. I have only one wish that is left in me, to be taken peacefully. Just before I was due to marry, I heard he could not walk anymore. It was then he gave up the fight. I had said goodbye almost 1 year before. And I'll never forget something he told me. Yes, it's a cruel world, but you must live without fear. But I sure do miss my grandfather. He's the reason why I'm here.
We are one of the last generations to hear testimony directly from Holocaust survivors. We've been listening to survivors as long as they've been ready to share. So I ask myself and others, now what? I have two other overarching questions for the evening that will be answered in this conversation. How do we each connect to the Holocaust? How do we feel about inheriting the position of witness? Lior, I'll start with you because we are still with you in the song. I wish I had a handkerchief. The song you shared is obviously about your grandfather, so that's your connection. And in the stunning music video, which I encourage you all to watch at some point soon, your son is in there too. So that's 3 generations in one song, one story. How do you connect? How do you connect the ancestral memory to your future, to your son, and how do you embody this and live this as an artist and as a parent?
It took me a long time to embrace the fact that I had the license, I think, to share stories surrounding the Holocaust. I'm not sure why, but I struggled with the idea that as a storyteller, I have the insight and or authenticity to be able to do that in an authentic, commanding way. So that song was special for me because it was the first time that I'd ever really touched on the subject of survival out of the Holocaust, and it was done through telling the story of my relationship with my grandfather. And in a way that I probably didn't approach it intentionally in order to do that, but through doing that, I think it opened the door for me to then look into it deeper. And since then, it's been something that, a theme that has pervaded more and more of my artistic focus. So I suppose given it's such a strong part of my identity, that was the door of expressing how much it is occupies as part of my identity. That's been a segue into it being a thematic focus.
Okay. And that authority, I mean, the storytelling certainly your superpower. So to feel confident to share the stories of the Holocaust and carry on that legacy so publicly, say, what do you think, was there a turning point for that? Or was it just leading into the personal with your grandfather? And
yeah, I think it was that song, as I mentioned, was a turning point because I felt like I was transmitting myself, not sort of being a third-person storyteller, and somehow expressing that part of my identity gave me a feeling of a license to then embrace other stories and be a conduit to then convey those stories as well.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah. And Emily, opening this up as well, as a songwriter too, you haven't focused so much in your work on any Holocaust storytelling in your personal work, but you have participated in a few Yom HaShoah events with me, and you are a mother of 3. So as a Jewish mother, how do you feel about when it comes to speaking with your kids about the Holocaust? Have you, will you, how?
I have. Not with all of them. My children are aged 12, 9 and 4. And I think there is, a time, it sort of has happened differently for the first 2. I have the 4-year-old, I don't think I can say much to him, but I feel it's incredibly important to talk to my children about it. But it's like, I guess it's been a drip feed. Like, I don't think that kids can handle such a big story. I do think that kids have their own way of like filtering and like self-regulating and sort of knowing what they can handle. So I trust them. I trust them to take what they need from the stories when I choose to give them the stories. My 12-year-old found the book Mouse, graphic novel on the bookshelf of my parents, and he got it, and I got a bit worried. It was sort of their first intro on their own with the Holocaust, and so I said to them, I was like, just let me know how you go. If you have any questions, if you so kind of like. I'm here, like, because there's a lot there, So, and I think that we all need to find this story, and in a way we need to find it for ourselves. And then also we have told them, but there's the big story, there's the macro story, which they know. They know that in World War II there were Nazis, they killed Jews, they know that, but. I'm almost more nervous to tell them the small story, the micro stories, the personal stories. Those because I remember how they affected me. That there are some of those stories that will never leave me when I have spoken to a survivor at our Shabbos table, or my neighbour Fella on the street, and somehow she dips into a memory, and it's just like. Everything goes quiet and you're just there with them. My kids haven't heard those stories yet, but I know they will in time. But yeah, so it's a gradual seeping into them of this story, which is in them. It's in their DNA. It's in their, it's in our culture now. Like this is our story. Like we have to own this story and keep telling it as well. Yeah.
I understand that it can make a child feel unsafe in the world, that someone hated them for no fault of their own.
That's right. That's right. And I don't want my kids, to feel unsafe. I want them to know the truth, but I don't, I don't want them to feel like victims. I want them to see how we've flourished, or it's a funny thing. My dad, I guess he's a massive optimist. And like in the Pesach Seder, when it says, and they will rise every generation against us, and, through our blood we shall live. He never liked that. He was like, he just didn't, it's kind of a bit dark for him. He didn't, and he didn't want it, maybe he just didn't want it to be true, He was like, not everyone's bad, not everyone's out to get us, I think, and I sort of got that from him, and I think there's something to it. I mean, without denying what happened and what still sometimes, the anti-Semitism that is still there. There was something in him that wanted to tell us that the world is a safe place, and I think I want something of that too.
Yeah. There's a safety in knowing that you're from people have tried to destroy you and they didn't win.
They did it, yeah.
Yeah. Mass, so that was a gateway text.
Yeah.
Holocaust text is something that seems to be changing. I was told by a publisher that people are done with those stories. And then Bram Presser's Dirt was published. So that was, on several levels, very satisfying. Bram, I'd love to hear from you, please, about Holocaust literature, your experience with it. You were a lawyer, now you are a full-time writer and dad. You found your way to do what's meaningful. I'd love to hear from you about Dirt and also the future of Holocaust literature.
Thanks. So firstly, it's funny because I heard this whole, publishers are done with Holocaust stories, and it's just like absolute rubbish because they sign them and publish them at such a rate of knots that it's almost astounding. It's probably one of the most published historical eras, most published about historical eras. The issue, though, is what's happening to it in the kind of context of literature, and particularly popular literature, popular fiction, where I should say first thing, like, thank God we still have survivors, and first and foremost, we should be directing people to listen to survivors, because while we have their voices, that's what we should be listening to.
Yes.
Right? Indeed. And if people seek to write about the Holocaust, they should be seeking to add to the conversation rather than rehash what's been done. If you're going to rehash what's been done, what you should be instead, save the effort. Like, writing a book is not fun, right? So save the struggle of that and say, go and read the survivor memoirs. Go speak to a survivor, because that's where the authentic story lies. That said, there is still a lot to say about the Holocaust, a lot to write about the Holocaust. Where we are at the moment, for better or worse, as we move further away in time, is that it is becoming very much just a setting for historical fiction. And what's happening is there are a lot of books that are being published that are quite irresponsible with the memory of the Holocaust, that distort it, that minimise it, that otherwise sanitise it. And there are some very, very successful books which are probably like the worst offenders in this regard. And there are two that come to mind, and I name them quite openly. I've written about it a lot. So The Boy in the Striped Pajamas and The Tattooist of Auschwitz, two books which are very problematic and caused a lot of issues in terms of Holocaust remembrance. But I actually just saw, literally a few days ago, someone brought it to my attention. There's a book being published, again by a major publisher, popular fiction, which is a detective murder story set in Auschwitz, right? And it's just like, so this is what so the issue is that we are now in a place where we have to like guard with like a degree of zealotry almost, the authentic memory. And so there are stories to tell, we can find them, but they ought not to be like inventions and minimizations, right? And thankfully there are also excellent books still being published about the Holocaust or set during the Holocaust, both in terms of memoirs, but also novels, and a lot of third generation writers are, of which I count myself amongst them, are in a place now where we're reckoning with our inherited trauma, right? And so there's a lot to be written about our understanding of the Holocaust as it affects us living in the world today. It's a scary world at the moment. That's just the reality. And a lot of it triggers a lot of these traumas that are within us at the moment. And there's a lot to be negotiated. Also with just our own personal histories. Like, so for me, when I wrote the Book of Dirt, it came about just because, I was very close with my grandparents, but they were the sort of survivors who didn't talk about their experience. And after they died, an article was published about my grandfather, saying that he had been chosen to be the literary curator of the Museum of the Extinct Race. And so I was kind of obviously flabbergasted by that, and I spent 8 years researching this book, which then took I went to spend a lot of time in Prague. He was Czech, and also I went to all the camps he was in, and followed the story, and over time found out the story. But I found that the other thing, and this is where fiction is really important, the records only give you so much, because they're actually, a lot of records were destroyed, a lot of things. So there is space to explore, right? But you have to do it in a way that is responsible, respectful, and also, as I said earlier, like that adds to the conversation, that doesn't just rehash. And so for me, that's like a really important, like I've sort of been quite vocal in sort of speaking out against books that I feel fail to do that, but also speaking up books that do. And I think it's really important that we don't let the Holocaust just become a setting for historical fiction of any kind, and it's just like, it's okay to write anything in the Holocaust, because at the end of the day, you put some barbed wire on the front of a book and it sells 100,000 copies, right? Because that's what happens. It is it's probably one of the top selling genres, despite the fact that people do, like publishers do say, no one's interested in Holocaust fiction. So, I mean, striking that balance, but also making sure that the right stories are being told, that you are still directing people to the classics as well, and also to speaking to survivors. And I was just thinking, like, I know Sarah's going to be speaking later, and I was just thinking about her, where, you look at art created by survivors as well, and stories written by, not memoirs, but like novels or whatever written by survivors. And I think, to look to them, because, and you'll find, I think, like, because they're drawn from this like wellspring of kind of humanity and resilience and love, and these are things that run much deeper than kind of the hatred and the violence that tried to snuff them out. And so that the love, the resilience, it runs deeper, and it runs eternal, and that's where you should be looking.
Thank you. I sort of want to keep on going with the conversation, but we do need to. I think that's respectfully turning to the survivors as the first point of remembering.
Always.
And always. It's important. Tracy, staying on the train of now I'm in a very awkward position, so please keep your back to me. Don't strain your neck. I want to ask, how are you connected to the Holocaust? I have a few questions for you, because I find your story fascinating and I know barely anything about it. How are you connected to the Holocaust?
Well, I'm not Jewish, so I'll just put that out there. And I've thought a lot about this question, and I really went tried to go back to my memories. They didn't serve me so well. But a few things have come to mind. And I was trying to think about where my convictions and values came from as a person. And in doing that, I started to think about my own schooling. And I think a lot of you here will probably agree with me when I say that what we learn in the boundaries of the school and the classroom don't necessarily imprint themselves on us as learners, but the things that stick with us are what happens outside of the school environment. And I know that one of those things that stood out for me as a student was coming here as a 15-year-old, and it's one of maybe 2 or 3 experiences I had as a student that really stands out. And it's interesting, Emily, because you talked about this being in your DNA, and I feel like this is imprinted on my DNA from that experience. And you know, I was thinking then about, this sounds really, really strange, but it took my mind to what my bedroom walls looked like as a teenager. And amongst, you know, my posters of my favourite bands and all of those things, I had quotes on the wall. And I had quotes from Martin Luther King Jr. and Gandhi and Nelson Mandela. And there was one picture that was on my wall in my bedroom. And I don't know if you may or may not know the photo I'm referring to when I speak about it, but it's from the 1968 Olympics. And it's 2 men of colour standing on the dais after the 200-metre event. And they're standing together saluting in protest for their rights in the USA. And for some reason, this became a photograph that was really important on the wall of my room. And then when I was thinking more about that, I thought, you know, with the hindsight of being an adult now, I thought, you know, every time I looked at that photograph, actually it wasn't the 2 men of colour that I was looking at and inspired by. It was actually Peter Norman, who was the Australian man standing on the dais with them. And he won the silver medal. And he stood there, this career-defining moment for him, possibly never an opportunity to have that happen to him again. And he allowed something bigger and better to take place. And what he allowed to take place was people standing up for their rights. And I think, you know, that I thought to myself, like, why did that end up on my wall? How did this happen? And I'm almost certain that this happened because of my visit to the JHC. And at that time, I heard from Stephanie Haller, and it was just an unforgettable experience. And I did bring a prop with me because when we've talked a lot about books, and this is actually a memoir that I read as a 15-year-old student in English. It is the memoir of a survivor who migrated to the USA. But, you know, I read through, my notes I was quite an insightful student, actually.
No surprise.
You know, I think about books that I've thrown away and kept over the years. And this is one that stayed constantly on my shelf. And because it was such a transformative, this coupled with meeting Stephanie Haller, I think really that's where my convictions and values came from. And as I went into then secondary education, knowing that was the experience I'd had as a student, I realised like this formed my own philosophy as a teacher. And I became increasingly frustrated by my inability to affect change in my students within the classroom. And the things that I know that are transformative for students, because I've lived it and I've seen transformation in students I've taught, are those extracurricular, those out of the classroom experiences. And I can't say that this is a traditional path to Holocaust education, but I think it's fated that I'm here. And, you know, I think about our slogan here, and, you know, I heard a witness and now I'm bearing witness to their stories, and that's really important to me.
Thank you. As a Holocaust educator, you are acting as a custodian of survivors' memories and testimonies, the ones who are no longer with us. How does that affect you, and how does that inform your thoughts on the future of Holocaust education?
I'm looking down at the first two rows here and looking at the people that inspire me every day, that I'm fortunate enough to work with every day, and you know, leading an amazing team of educators here, and we're all hugely inspiring people who work in this museum and within the education team. And I think, you know, it's for the future of Holocaust education, I know survivors will always be at the core of education in Holocaust. And I think we need to be thinking about not how, but how does the impact remain when our survivors are no longer physically present in the room. And, you know, Brammy talked about memoir, and I really believe in the power of memoir. I mean, I've got testament to memoir here and the power of memoir here. So I think memoir has to always be a part of Holocaust education moving forward. We all in this room, everybody here, becomes a custodian to the memory of our survivors, and it's up to us, and it's really our responsibility in this world to make sure that their stories, their voices continue and are heard, and we use those voices not just to teach about the Holocaust, but to be thinking about what can we learn? What are the lessons we can learn from learning about the Holocaust itself? So within our programs here, we've recently, that's been a big question that we've been thinking about, and we've developed a learning framework that is centred around character strengths. And the character strengths we hope students can learn and build upon and reflect on themselves when they learn about the Holocaust.
Yeah, that is encouraging to hear. It's reassuring to know that you're on it. I think with memories, we take for granted that we can't just file our memories in a drawer and open it again and it will be the same. And we do have testimonies and witness accounts in the form of memoir or in the form of fiction, like as Bram mentioned. But I'm concerned they'll get lost in a certain genre and people will stop looking at it as with the sense of humanity and just going there for the thrill of the story. So we can...
If I can just add one other thing that I think is really important is artefact, and the place that artefact has in that as well. So a combination of all different things, but you know, artefacts that are housed here in our museum, we use those in the education of students. We use those to retell stories, to share those things, whether those are experiences in whole or in part. There's certainly things that become very important in maintaining memory.
Great. So Ezra, you are a student. You're in Year 8 at King David. I met Ezra, who is, Emily is his auntie. So we were on an outing in the Northern Rivers and I met Ezra and he shared a poem with me. It was on climate change and it took my breath away, so to speak. So I asked Ezra to join us this evening and if he could prepare a poem on his reflections on how he connects to the Holocaust and how he can perhaps connect others to that as well. Ezra, would you like to share that poem with us now, please?
My poem is called They Don't Want to Remember, We Don't Want to Forget. They don't want to remember, we don't want to forget. Freedom, happy lives, no reason to fret. Wealth, education, happiness were plenty. The Nazis stole this, their hearts were empty. They don't want to remember, we don't want to forget. An election, a ghetto, a lit cigarette. Imminent distress that they wanted to ignore. Human waste on the streets, diseases galore. They don't want to remember, we don't want to forget. A toothbrush moustache, a uniform, a face hard set. Concentration camps being built. Fences 12 feet high. A speech declaring that they must die. They don't want to remember, we don't want to forget. A mother kissing on a head. An entire nation, deportation, searching far and wide. A yellow star that can't go far, they did their best to hide. They don't want to remember the shivering pains. We don't want to forget the lines as long as trains. They don't want to remember, we don't want to forget the people crammed together who had never met. And the smoke came down like the night, and everything was still. And the mystery sent down their backs an electric chill. They don't want to remember, we don't want to forget. Turned to ash as the cold sun set. Mothers, fathers, children too, there was nothing at all that they could do. They don't want to remember, we don't want to forget. Wandering alone, going home, and yet home doesn't feel like home anymore. Not without the people lost in this war. They don't want to remember the loss and the cold, and we don't want to forget the stories that they've told. And although they don't want to remember, because we don't want to forget, they recount their stories to us so we can carry the torch and keep the fire lit. And so we sit and listen to what they remember, because they are the fire and we are the ember. Thank you.
We've done it again, Ezra. So you've obviously learnt quite a lot about Holocaust that informed that poem. Do you remember when you first learnt about the Holocaust, how it landed with you?
Yeah, well, a lot of my education about the Holocaust comes from movies and books, and maybe I've been taught some stuff wrong, but I don't know. I've got a lot of things that have helped me to know what I know, and I've heard lots of stories and movies and books, and all of this is like just a fraction of what I know. School has also helped me quite a bit, and my family talking to me has also done a lot for me.
Do you have any advice for adults who are wondering how to speak about the Holocaust to children in their lives?
I think that, you have a pretty good idea of what you're doing. You you just seep it in there, and then as they get older, you can start to lay it on. It's
all right. Did you get that?
Yeah, you can start to talk about the more intense little stories that are scary and maybe not so good for 4-year-olds.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks, Ezra.
You're welcome.
Sarah, your work has taken you into the depths of conversations with an array of brilliant minds. I know you've interviewed a survivor, Guta, you've spoken with Ephraim Finch, you've spoken with Gabor Mate, descendant of Holocaust survivors, second generation, and an intergenerational trauma expert. I would love to hear from you how you connect with the Holocaust and how you have either intentionally or inadvertently woven the lessons through the rest of your work.
Yeah, it's really interesting because when I was reflecting on my conversations that I've had with many people on the podcast, I was thinking, where did this love for storytelling come? And then I realised that it was my grandpa, who was a Holocaust survivor, and when we were young, my brother and I used to sit around the table with him and he'd tell us the stories of, hiding in forests and escaping and all this kind of stuff. And I remember just being so intrigued by his stories and so fascinated. And it also, taught me the art of listening and how when we really listen to people, they're willing to share a lot more. And then I started doing the podcast, and Guta Goldstein, who I think is here tonight, is a divine Holocaust survivor. Oh, there she is. Hello. And we spoke, and she's a good friend of my grandma's, and it was just one of the most extraordinary conversations I think I've ever had. And, Guta was so brave, and I was the one that was crying, and she's telling her stories with such dignity and hope. And I also realised that we shouldn't shy away from these stories because they're important, and even though sometimes they're hard for people to listen to, we need to have this depth in our world where we've got a lot of TV shows that really don't touch the surface of anything like this, and we live in a world of, fast movement and reality TV shows, and that's the thing that rates and does really well. It was important to me to still do a podcast and still tell the stories of people like yourself. And, after I interviewed Guta and then Ephraim Finch, who is an extraordinary man, I got a lot of emails from people saying to me, majority of my audience is not Jewish. And they said, I after listening to these stories, I have so much respect for the Jewish people. And, with Ephraim, the way that you bury your dead is some of the most extraordinary love and beautiful things that I've ever heard. And it made me think that, because I felt like I was being a bit biased, I was telling so many Jewish stories, and would my audience think how come she's just focusing on the Jewish stories? And I realised not only was I obviously proud, but these were exceptional stories to tell. And it made me, start thinking of a whole lot of different things. And the subject of hope came up a lot. And it's this idea of hope. And what is that? And how can I weave that through a lot of my own stories that I share on the podcast? And how can I teach people what hope is? And it really delves into Viktor Frankl's work a lot. And I saw a quote yesterday, and I just thought it was extraordinary. And it was, never shatter someone's hope, because that might be the only thing that they have. And I just think that's so beautiful. And I think with our Holocaust survivors, I was listening back to Esther Perel's interview that I did with her. And at the start, we talk a lot about her parents were Holocaust survivors. And she spoke a lot about how the survivors, they came together as a community after, and it was being together and sharing their stories that allowed their survival to, happen and flourish more. And I thought to myself, being here tonight and us being here and still respecting what's happened and telling the stories and not shy away from these harder stories allows people, like yourselves and the ones that perish, their stories to go on. And it's something that we need to do. So I think, having this podcast, sharing the stories is just an extraordinary privilege to be able to talk to people like that. And then, we get on talking about epigenetics with Gabor Mate and how, it goes through the different generations. And I think that's also an extraordinary area that, we can look into. And just being here and sharing these kind of stories is so unbelievably important.
Thank you. Yeah. We all have inherited memories and stories, and we are custodians of those. Could I get a round of applause for the panellists, please? We are going to hear a song from Emily now. After we hear from Emily, we'll be hearing from a survivor, Sarah Saaroni, who is, I've had the privilege of listening to her speak before, and in the true definition of the word, she is awesome.
So this song, Sag nicht kein Mal, Never Say, was written by Hirschblick in 1943 in the Vilna Ghetto in Poland. And he had heard about the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising, and he was inspired. And so he wrote this song of defiance and fortitude. He was very young. He was 21, and at 22 he was presumed captured by the Nazis and murdered. So he didn't make it, but this song did. And I grew up at the Yom HaShoah remembrance, and the survivors would get up and sing this song. And I didn't, you would sing it in Yiddish, and I didn't know Yiddish. But the song would just move me to my core. It was such a beautiful song. I didn't even know what the lyrics were. And when I learnt the lyrics in English, I was moved even deeper. They are so beautiful. And I am sad that I don't know Yiddish. I'm sorry. I would love to sing it in Yiddish, which is really what it feels like it should be sung in. But I'm going to do my best, and I'm going to sing it in English. And I invite anybody to kind of sing along with me in English or Yiddish. Never say that you are going your last way. Your black skies blot out the blue of day. For the hour in which we long for will appear. The earth shall underneath our tread, but we are here. For the hour in which we long for will appear. The earth shall underneath our tread, but we are here. From land of green palms to land all white with snow. We are coming without pain and without woe. And wherever this blood of drop did drop, our courage will again sprout from that spot. And wherever the spurt of blood did drop, our courage will again sprout from that spot. For us, the morning sun will radiate the day. The enemy and the past will fade away. But you don't delay on sunrise way too long. Like a cold word, let us always sing this song. But should the dawn delay on sunrise way too long, like a cold word, let us always sing this song. This song was written with our blood and not with lead. song for free birds overhead. But the people in crumbling walls did stand. They stood and sung this song with pistols held in hand. But the people in crumbling walls did stand. They stood and sang this song with pistols held in hand. So never say that you are going your last way. Let skies blot out the blue of day. For the hour in which we long for will appear. The earth shuts underneath that shade that we are here. For the hour in which we long for will appear. The earth shuts underneath that shade that we are here.
On Yom HaShoah, when we meditate on the widespread destruction of Jewish communities throughout Europe, one often hears it said that some 2 out of 3 Jews perished. And while that is true, those numbers are correct for the continent as a whole. If we look at particular parts of Europe, the survival rate for Jews was even lower still. In Poland, the survival rate for Jews was only 6%. In the part of Poland from which Sarah came, a region that was named by the Germans the Lublin district, the survival rate was only 1%. That Sarah was able to survive was largely due to the fact that under extremely dangerous and impossibly difficult circumstances, she was able to make her way out of Poland and into Germany. Using a series of false identities and assumed names, she posed as a Polish Catholic girl, together with other Polish Catholic girls, found work in a factory within Germany. Given that Sarah's first language was Yiddish, and given that, as Sarah's brothers always told her, she would speak in her sleep, even going to bed at night was fraught with danger. The possibility of being detected was always present, and one never knew who to trust. Ultimately, it was somebody who Sarah had originally considered a friend who betrayed her. And after intensive Gestapo questioning, she was forced to submit. For Sarah, that very much could have been the end. Together with a group of other girls, she was brought to a train station from which she was going to be deported to Majdanek, in the very heart of the Lublin district. When Sarah shares her story with students here at the museum, she often says that she was not brave, she just acted. And yet, in many ways, is that not the essence of bravery? When she continued walking, even though the girls in front of her had been forced to stand still, walking between them and the trains, miraculously not being detected, and boarding another train taking her back into Germany proper, was that not a courageous act? Sarah's story, as with the stories of all of our survivors here at the museum, is a story of resistance. By engaging in those stories, we are able not only to engage with the destruction of the many, but the survival of the few. Sarah's resilience and fortitude are astonishing, and I thank Sarah very much for the opportunity to be able to ask her a few questions this evening about the process of giving testimony here at the museum. I wanted to start off by asking you, Sarah, why you feel it is so important for students today to meet with a survivor.
It's important because it all happened by ignorance. We are not something special. We all belong to one human race. There are no different races. There are different nations. And because of the ignorance that it all happened.
Thank you, Sarah. Sarah, I understand for many years you were not able to speak about your experiences.
No, for 42 years, I couldn't talk about it. After the war, when the war finished, I had nightmares for 20 years, night after night. I was running, hiding, trying to get away, and regardless what I did, I was always caught. I used to wake up in the middle of the night with my heart pounding as if I did the running really, wet from perspiration. And it took me a long time to go back to sleep. But the minute that I fell asleep, it continued. And I was scared to mention it to anyone because they would say I'm crazy. So having the nightmares at night and then remembering the past during the day, I would have gone completely crazy. So I just locked the door on it. I pretended it didn't happen to me. And I didn't talk. My husband died. He never knew my story. He just knew that I work as a Polish Christian girl in Germany. Sometimes I wanted to talk about it, but the moment I opened my mouth, something inside me was to clench down, and I became hysterical. Secondly, I didn't want my children to hate. So only in '87, when I wrote my life story, that I became free. And I remember it so vividly. I was sitting in the room looking to the window, and suddenly, I felt such a heavy, when I wrote the last sentence, I felt so light, as if such heavy load was lifted off my shoulders. And I looked around and everything looked so beautiful. I never saw it in colors before. Everything was gray before. And now I saw the birds singing, the butterflies flying. And I felt that if I would go outside and flap my arms, I would be able even to But at that time, I realized that I can talk about it without breaking down.
Thank you, Sarah. I think that's such a beautiful description of how you were able to shed so much of what you had bottled up. What is the experience like for you today when you share your story publicly?
I feel it's my duty that people should know what ignorance brings. And you can't change all the people. They might pretend that they changed. Give them the opportunity, they will do it all over again. But the only hope are children, to open their minds, that they have to be sure what they are doing is the right thing to do, not because they were told to do it. They should have an open mind.
Thank you. Sarah, if you don't mind my asking, are there any parts of your experience that are difficult for you to share?
No. In the beginning, it was difficult. But as I said, I had to do it. I had to give voice to those who lost their voices.
Thank you. And I wonder, Sarah, And you've touched on this a little bit already, but I wonder if there's any particular message that you really hope students take away from the opportunity to meet with a survivor.
Yes, I don't brainwash them. I don't, I just tell them how it was. And it's up to them. I don't say that I can reach everyone, but I reach some, even small amount of children. It's good. They should know what can happen if they just follow. And that's wrong. They have to have an open mind and to question it, to make sure that what they are doing is the right thing to do.
Thank you, Sarah. And as we build this towards a conclusion, I wonder if, in as much as you also speak to members of the public and in as much as you are speaking to us, all of us here today, if there's anything that you feel it's important that we all of us take away from the experience of engaging with this history.
Look, after the war, I was sure that people learned from it. That will never happen again. But it didn't take long. Not only for Jews, everywhere. And they are still killing one another. And they are killing now their own brothers, because one goes to different church or different mosque. But they are the same people. And the world is so beautiful if we will just live in peace. You can't love everyone. That's impossible. You can't love your neighbor. You can like your neighbor or dislike him, but you can love your mother, your child. You can fall in love, but you can't love everyone. But you should try to live in peace and respect the other one for what he is, not what you want him to be. Because everybody has got a right to live the life he wants to live, to dress he wants to dress, as long as he doesn't force others to be like him.
Thank you, Sarah. I think that's a beautiful message. And I want to thank you not only for the time that you have shared with us this evening and allowing me the opportunity to ask you these questions, but I want to thank you for all of the remarkable work that you do for us ongoing with all of the students here at the museum.
Thank you.
There's so much to take away from tonight, and it's truly heartening to see the interest in preserving memory, as well as the range of ways we can do this. It's clear that each of you, in different ways, are grappling with your responsibility as inheritors and transmitters of memory. I'm sure what you've shared with us will inspire our audience. Our new Melbourne Holocaust Museum is opening softly, but will be louder soon once the exhibitions are complete. Our wish is to be a home for the next generations to come, a place to discuss the lessons of the Holocaust meaningfully and safely. We want this to be a safe place in which to have difficult conversations. The architecture of this building is purposely designed to be warm and comforting, so that visitors like yourselves will feel supported when encountering these difficult topics, these difficult memories. And with our specialist staff in our Holocaust Library and Resource Centre, we're here to guide you and support you in your efforts to research and remember. We also want to engage with younger generations about your connection to the Holocaust, what it means to you and how you would like to commemorate it. So feel free to share your thoughts with us. I'm truly grateful to have an incredible team who are here, who are all passionate about our three core activities: preserve, remember, and educate. And each year, as you can see, it's around the time that we hold our annual appeal, which invites community members to support our efforts to educate as many school students as possible and to spark change in each and every visitor through a transformative encounter with the lessons of the Holocaust. And additionally, part of our really important work is to care for an incredible collection of documents, photographs, artworks and artefacts in perpetuity. So your support is obviously greatly appreciated. I want to thank the team of staff and volunteers who helped put this event together, especially Aviva Weinberg, Alice McInnes and Robbie Simons and Siân Meltzer. I also want to thank Siân Darling and the Museum of Inherited Memories for your efforts towards tonight's success. And I thank our wonderful panellists who have all given their time and energy to this Yom HaShoah event, and of course to the wonderful Sarah Saaroni, our guest survivor speaker, who inspires us all here with your incredible energy and passion for our mission. And I thought, as a token of our appreciation to the panellists and in line with what we were discussing or one of the themes, we would like to share with you a gift of one of Sarah's wonderful memoir, which will inspire all of you. So we bring this Yom HaShoah to a close. I encourage you all to continue to take your responsibility to remember seriously, and I sincerely hope to see you back here soon. Thank you, and I also have a bunch of flowers for Sarah, but I will come and give these to you. So thank you, and good night.